So, good morning. Today we are excited to be talking to Rob Sand, who is joining us from Des Moines, Iowa. And Rob, we always start each of our interviews with this same question. And often we're talking to farmers, so they usually end up telling us about crops and livestock, and sometimes their kids. But we also use this question for everybody because it's actually a universal one. So, we start with the question, what are you growing? So, you can tell us about yourself, your family,
Oh,
what you're doing in your life. So, Rob, what are you growing?
I love that question. Certainly two boys. They are 9 and 11. No diapers, no naps, no teenagers. We are in the sweet spot. We are loving life right now, and we are growing them hopefully to be responsible, productive, and good people. Growing a loving marriage, that's always something that continues to take concentration and effort. They call it a commitment for a reason. And I think ours is great, but it's also one of those things that you always you want to tend to, you want to tend to it. And I think professionally, certainly in the work that I've done, both as a prosecutor for 7 years, mostly in public corruption cases, but also in violent crime cases, is growing public safety and growing accountability for people in positions of trust and power. I think that's a very important thing that we have too little of these days. And I have to add one other thing, because it really did feel like we were growing something. When we started our campaign last year, we did 100 public town halls around the state in the campaign for governor. We did every single county seat, and we invited everybody. We told everybody, most of the events were noticed months in advance, and they were open to everybody. So oftentimes 30% of the room wasn't people who were in my political party, which is great. And we would have each person raise their hand for whether they were in the Republican Party. We would applaud for all the Republicans. Then the independent voters, we would applaud for all the independents. And the Democrats, and we would applaud for the Democrats. And then we would together sing the first verse of America the Beautiful. And that to me really felt like growing something. We have very few opportunities to cultivate peace or to cultivate unity or to cultivate commonality in our politics today. And that invitation to people to really, hey, you disagree. That's okay. We can agree to disagree and come together and unite to actually do something together. That really felt like we were growing something positive that just has been dormant for a very long time.
So, Rob, I feel like you kind of buried the big one here of what you're growing for our non-Iowa listeners. What is the campaign that you speak of? And why is gubernatorial like the stupidest word in the world? Seriously, I'm sorry, but
I appreciate you asking that, because I've also wondered that question myself. I don't have an answer to that one. But yeah, I mean, I'm running for governor. The more important thing is the why and the how. I don't just want to run for governor. I don't just want to be. I want to actually bring people together. I want to actually take a political system that is oriented on dividing us from each other and oriented on splitting us up, and try to find a way to make it bring us together, which I do think involves political reform. I don't think that the Democratic or the Republican parties actually solve enough problems to deserve their shared monopoly on our choices at the ballot box. I don't think that they should have special legal privileges. I think that independent voters should have an equal right in our state to participate. I'm running for governor, but governor's a position, and really it's about saying to this moment in our state, like, we've gone too far. We need a new direction, and we need to get wherever we're going to go. We need to talk about where we're going to go, but we got to get there together.
how do you decide to run for governor? I mean, I know we've seen a lot of Facebook comments asking for it for several years, but did you just like wake up one morning and you're like, I think I'm going to run for governor? Seems like the right day. Or like, how do you get there?
I think every journey for any person that's running for office is different. I do think that there are some people who wake up in the morning someday and say, this is it, I got to do it. I really liked my job as state auditor in my first term because we truly could do audits. For those of you who don't know, I should give a little more context. Again, you've kind of heard me already stake out my territory on not really being a particularly big fan of the two-choice system. When I won, the thing I did was I appointed a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican to the most senior positions in the auditor's office. So the independent and the Republican had actually made campaign contributions to my opponent in the campaign. I elevated them anyway. I'm a believer in public service over politics. And I think public service means you have to serve everyone, including the people who disagreed with you and worked against you. And so working together in my first term, we found a record amount of misspent money in the state of Iowa. And the answer to that was Iowans reelected us. They were like, good, you're doing your job. And then the answer to Iowans reelecting us was the insiders in state government deciding that they should limit our capacity to audit. So they passed a law that every single government watchdog in America that commented on this, they said this is a terrible idea. It's going to lead to an increase in waste, fraud, and abuse of tax dollars. They passed that law anyways. There was bipartisan opposition, so I should give some credit. There were a handful of Republicans in the Iowa House who had the courage to vote against what was a very obviously bad bill. But that was one of those things where it's sort of like, well, okay, looking ahead, why would I run again to try to win an office where we have been muzzled, where I can't really serve the public, where they have found ways repeatedly every time we're, diving in on something to slow us down. Everybody here knows that when somebody slows you down in getting your work done, you can't do as much of it or do it as well, or to stop us altogether. And so there's a real limited ability at this point for the state auditor to serve the state of Iowa. And it raises my belief that we need a new direction in the state of Iowa. How can you be willing to do something that is so bonkers and so obviously wrong as to make it harder to find misspent tax dollars? So to me, it reduced my interest in continuing in an office that now had been muzzled. It increased the importance of a new direction for the state of Iowa. That was a big impact. That's not the only piece of it, but certainly it was a process that really was accelerated at that point, I would say. So that's a little bit on how the question of how you get there. You certainly talk to a lot of people. You see some of those Facebook comments. I used to spend more time on social media than I do now. I highly recommend an app called Screen Zen for anyone who wants to spend less time on anything on their phone. Then you talk to people and you listen to people. And I do think that there's a large number of Iowans right now who want a new direction. And I think they can look at my track record as well as my upbringing and who I am and say, okay, we'll give you a shot.
Yeah, I feel like anyone who has children knows that if you ask what they're doing and they say nothing and try to look real innocent, that probably means there's something going on. And this feels like the state level equivalent of the same thing.
Yeah.
So as farmers, we know that we're now less than 2% of the population, but when it comes to any political issue, we don't necessarily as constituents always have much power. But I guess when I'm thinking of it from like an agricultural perspective, if there aren't that many of us, but our concerns affect a lot of people, how do we as constituents, get our point across to representatives? A lot of times we hear, call your representative. Does that actually make a difference? Sending emails like on a personal basis when we're feeling, especially in these times, like we're not making any kind of a difference. How is it that we can actually feel like we're contributing in the political sphere?
I think that's a great question. That's the traditional answer. And I can't say that it's wrong. I think it's always good to contact your elected officials. But I do think that our system is at a point right now where it doesn't listen, where the voice of the people is drowned out by the voice of party insiders and party leaders. And I don't think that that's the most effective thing to do if you want change. I think the most effective thing to do if you want change is to start talking to your neighbors. And I don't mean the neighbors that you always talk to. We need to reach out. We need to talk to new people. We need to start weaving social fabric and getting people together and finding those places of agreement. There's been this effort over the last few years for a lot of people to do a thing called 5 calls, where they call 5 of their representatives every day or every so often. Maybe it's once a week. I don't know. But it's, your member of Congress, your 2 U.S. senators, and your 2 legislators in your state house, and something like that. I would recommend instead, if you want to get active, and if you're in the state of Iowa, reach out to our campaign, reach out to really anybody, any organization. It doesn't have to be a partisan one, and say, hey, can you give me phone numbers and names for 15 people or 30 people in my town or in my neighborhood who oftentimes vote but aren't necessarily the most consistent voters, who maybe are open-minded and could use a friend. We've got an epidemic of loneliness in this country. I think it's actually more important for us to talk to each other. And I'm not suggesting, if you're doing this through our campaign, and please do it through our campaign. Help us win this race. But if you're doing it through the campaign, I'm not saying pick up the phone and say, hey, are you going to vote for Rob Sand? This is Caite who lives down the street. No, pick up the phone.
I'm pretty sure that's what your mom told me to do though, Rob. But I'm going to tell her you said I don't have to door knock. That's what I'm hearing.
But I think the more effective route to change for us is to build relationships with people. Those relationships shouldn't just be around politics and who we vote for. They should be around listening to each other and hearing each other out. And when someone says something that we disagree with, saying, tell me more. And then when we hear another answer, saying, why? And letting them again be heard. And later on down the road, we can get to the point where we're talking about candidates and talking about politics. But I think what most of us need right now is actual conversation and connection with people in our communities. And that would go a lot further for us than, just being another hash mark on the number of people who called today about tariffs to Senator Ernst's office.
So I guess that really leads into something that you talked about in the what you're growing. You're a parent too, like we are. And we want to also raise kids who are good people, but are also aware of what's going on socially, in age appropriate ways, and are engaged in their communities. And sometimes that means being engaged in politics. But how do we raise our kids to be those things when it seems a lot of times, like we've already discussed, that the system is kind of broken and we maybe don't necessarily trust in what's going on in the system, but we still want our kids to feel like they have a voice and that they should care and participate?
I know that this is not a common topic, and so I'll pick it up and I'll put it down again. You'll love the rose mauling. It's a very Decorah thing, but this cross is hanging on the wall in our kitchen. Faith is a primary motivator for me in the work that I do. It's also a primary motivator for me and the values that I teach my kids. And that faith has a bigger aim. It's getting up every day and making decisions that are good things to do in the world, and trusting that making those decisions and doing those things in a way is the end. It doesn't have to be that the outcomes that we see in our own lifetimes are the outcomes that we seek. I oftentimes think about the fact that of all of the women that went to the Seneca Falls Convention, my belief is that only one of them ever lived long enough to cast a vote. They were doing it because they said, hey, this isn't right. We should have a voice. And they weren't doing it because they thought in their own, political analysis or punditry, I think we can get this done in 10, 20 years. They were just coming together to say, we should do this. This needs to be a thing that happens, and we're going to start it. I think too often we're wrapped up in analysis, and we're not thinking enough about just like, well, is this a good thing to do? Is this the right thing to do? And a lot of my teaching to my kids comes down to, you don't have to know that this is going to be, you don't have to know that you're going to win. You don't have to know that you're going to get the answer that you want. You just have to know that what you're doing is the right thing to do. And if you do that, then you don't have to really worry about a whole lot else. There's space for those things. There's room for those things. We want to be smart about the approaches that we take to trying to do good in the world. There are better routes to doing good and less effective routes to doing good. But the bottom line for me is I want to teach my kids about being involved because it's a good thing to do in and of its own right.
So, Rob, that actually leads really well into my next question here. My kids are roughly the same age as yours, and they don't really need any encouragement to follow their own paths in life, shall we say. So, as a former prosecutor and a parent of kids the same age as mine, how do you explain laws that you may not personally agree with? Trying not to put too fine a point on anything.
I talk about this with audiences too when I'm out on the town hall tour. I'm a big believer in the democratic process. There can be groups who get together, who pass a law that's a very good and important decision at that time. But then 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years later, people look at it and they go, why did we do that? What were we thinking? And it also is the kind of thing that can change overnight as technology changes and as the world around us changes. All of a sudden, there can be a law that we look at and we go, oh my goodness, we didn't know that was going to have this kind of effect, but it is, and it's not good. I talk to my kids about that process, about how we can get there. And then I like I did at the beginning here, I talk a lot about how oftentimes it comes down to this broken two-choice system that leads many of us to feel trapped into supporting the people that we vote for, where then those people go and do things that we are very much not excited about, and they don't do a lot of things that we believe that they should do. And because we are effectively trapped, we don't really have much of a lever of accountability on. And then I always circle back to the importance of talking about change and pushing for change where you think it's important. I want to be clear too. There's a great quote. When I say pushing for change, it makes me think of I think this was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Fight for what you believe in, but do it in a way that will make people want to join you. If we're yelling at people, it's probably not the most effective way to get them to do things. I don't know a lot of people who are frequently persuaded by being screamed at. And I think that listening to people actually to find that nugget of agreement where you can say, oh, actually, we agree on this, and this is the route that I take from there, can be a much more effective way to build that understanding and build that relationship that can lead to someone being open-minded. A lot of people right now aren't willing to admit that they voted for someone that they don't like, because a bunch of people on their own side will say, shh, don't say that. And a bunch of people on the other side will say, told you so. And neither of those things are effective. And so a lot of us stay sort of hidden in our corners, in our partisan corners where we aren't really happy, but we don't want to take the risk. And so a lot of what we're doing in this campaign, like I said, is encouraging people to take that risk, is giving them an opportunity to come out and meet each other in the middle and say, hey, I'm really tired of the division. I'm tired of the hatred. I'm tired of the lies. I'm tired of the venom. What I want are people that I can trust, that I can work with, who are interested in give and take.
That's what I'm seeing on my own Facebook right now, is people saying, well, they voted for this. You made this bed, you should lie in it. Like, cool, I'm not going to try that on my kids. I don't feel like we should try it on adults. It's not helpful. So pivoting a little from work and politics and that. So you mentioned you've been a state auditor for 8 years? Is that right?
Well, it'll be 2 terms. So actually it is 2026 and I was elected I got sworn in 2019. So 7 years as of. That's why all those people on LinkedIn were congratulating me on my 7-year work anniversary earlier, actually.
So I didn't even know state auditor was a thing, to be honest, until you started showing up in my social media. And I was like, what the heck is a state auditor? And if anyone else doesn't know, you're just going to have to go find out for yourself like I did. But what is it like for your kids to get their allowance from the state auditor? Like, do you require a set of books? Are you is there looking into any sort of misspending? Do you require them to find the best deals on things? What's the process like here?
That's a very good question. Both my wife and I talk to them a lot about responsible spending and whether or not we need a thing versus we want a thing, and whether or not getting it now versus waiting for it to be on sale is a good idea. We do teach them about that stuff. We're pretty light in terms of rules. We might make suggestions about whether or not, we might openly say whether or not we think something is a good idea to buy, but we don't say you cannot buy that with your own money. That's not a thing I've ever said. I can check in with my wife, but I'm pretty sure she's never said it either.
Maybe on something that was really loud or annoying. There's sometimes there's a line there.
Yeah. That would be the kind of thing where it'd be like, you can buy that. You understand you're not going to be able to use that within 20 yards of me. So why not you buy it, If it can go outside, that might work. My wife is, she's got a great finance background, stronger than mine. She's very, very smart and understands how to get to the bottom line. And she does more with their allowance than I do. So those are good questions for her. But they do get one. They don't have hard rules on it. And at the end of the day, my auditing truly is much more about, it's people in positions of trust and power. It's the government who holds your tax dollars that I'm auditing and that I'm most interested in auditing. Our kids, it's more like, well, look, if here's the upside and downside of buying that thing at that price. It's your money. You can decide. And I am a believer. I mean, I remember being a kid and standing in the toy aisle at Walmart and having this like, ooh, is that worth? Should I spend that money? I could feel it in my stomach. I think it's good to have those experiences when you're a kid, because it helps you make better decisions later on. I hope they buy some stuff that later on they're like, oh my gosh, that was a terrible waste of money, because that's going to be a learning experience for them.
Definitely. So Rob, this is a question we've asked all of our guests since we started this podcast, and we're in our 5th season. So you get the same question as everyone else. So we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up to make sure that you win.
I have a really good hand whistle. Let me try to do it. There you go. And if I was warmed up, it would be much better than that, too, I should say.
That was deeply impressive. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much, Rob.
This was fun. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.